Greeting and salutations. I am Lloyd, a producer at LCD Productions, and I have come to share this new series of visual audiobooks with you, the listener, the supporter, the viewer. Together we will go on a journey like never before, fly to new heights with Project Aerospace, explore new land and cityscapes with photations, even change the dimension of time through the power of time-lapse photography from live to tape. We'll even travel beyond the mind's eye into worlds captured and generated through animation from Thumbs United daily animation series. As we together go on these journeys filled with photography and theater of the mind, I hope you remember the core belief that we hold, that anyone can become the master of art, meaning that it is not some born skill what makes someone good at being creative. It is a desire to practice and spend time being creative that creates the master. I hope that these films, photography, and stories inspire you to set some time aside and practice some creativity. I believe if we all spend more time creating and being constructive, the world would be a better place, a more friendlier and fulfilling place. Thank you for coming. Let's begin this journey. Hello, this is Live to Tape. We are recording the Airship, the Golden Hind, as part of our visual audiobook. And we are picking up where we left off. This is part 7 of our readings. And this is chapter 17, A Surprise for Captain Prout. Captain Abraham Prout, master and part owner of the Captain Abraham Prout, master and part owner of the topsail schooner Myrtle of 120-ton burthen, came on deck on hearing the mate give the order all hands shorten sail. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, till dark and very cold, and the Myrtle was on the 14th parallel of the southern hemisphere, and the month being June, it was midwinter. There were flakes of snow flying about. For the last 3 days the night had neither been sleeting, raining, or snowing, or else all three together. But the winds was fair, and there was every prospect of schooner made a quick passage from Albany to Hobart. There's something behind this muck, Abe remarked the mate, who, on the strength of being the old man's brother-in-law, was on familiar terms with the Captain Prout. The old hooker won't carry her topsail with the breeze and a fishin'. Best be on the safe side, I say. Quite right, Tom, agreed the skipper. New topmasts cost a more sight of money in these hard times. Anything to report? Nothing, replied the mate laconically. He shook the frozen sleet from the rim of his southern and turned to inform the crew in polite language of the sea that he'd better get a move on or not stand there hanging on to the slack. There's some tea going, Tom announced Captain Prout. Nip below and get a mug to warm you up a bit. The mate fell in with the suggestion with alacrity, the skipper having seen the hands complete their tasks of getting the topsails off her, went aft to where the half a dozen helmsmen were almost mechanically toying with the wheel. Through the sheer force of habit, Captain Prout peered into the feebly illuminated compass bowl. Even as he did so, there was a tremulous crash. The Myrtle trembled from struck to kelson, while aloft a jumble of splintered spars, cordage, and canvas fell upon the deck like a miniature avalanche. Captain Prout's first impression were those painted surprise. For the moment he was firmly convinced that the schooner had piled herself upon an uncharted rock, but the absence of any sign of the vessel pounding against a hard bottom reassured him on that point. Although in ignorance of what had occurred, the tough skipper rose to the occasion. "Steady on your helm," he shouted to the man at the wheel. "Don't let her fall off her course." The helmsman obeyed. It was no easy matter, since she was enveloped in a fold of mainsail, and the Myrtle was towing the main topmast of a portion of the cross trees alongside. Alarmed with the commotion, the watch below, 2 men and a boy, rushed on deck, while the mate, issuing from the after cabin with a tin pannikin of tea still grasped in his hand, raised his voice in a strongly worded inquiry to know what had happened to the old hooker. Get a light, Tom, and we'll have a squint at the damage," shouted the old man. "One of you sound the well and see if there's making any. Dick, you just see if there's sidelights are burning properly." The mate disappeared to return with a hurricane lamp. "Jerusalem," he exclaimed, "ain't it a lash-up?" The main mast had been broken off 5 feet below the cross trees, which the result that the main and throat halyboard blocks had gone with the broken spars, while the mainsail with the gaff and boom had fallen across the deck. The shroud hallards still held, and the wire shroud themselves trailed aftward. Both bulwarks. Apparently the foremast was intact, since it was the main topmast stay that had parted under the strain. This much Captain Prout saw, noted, and understood, but what puzzled him was a telescopic object looking very much like an exaggerated top hat that lay upon the deck between the mainmast rifle rail and the coaming of the main hatch. "Guess it's a meteorite," hazarded the mate. "Meteorite, my foot!" ejaculated Captain Prout scornfully. "If it hadn't been, that would have gone slap bang through the old hooker, and we'd have been in the ditch." It's had a good try anyway," rejoined the mate. "Half a dozen deck planks stove in." He held the lantern close to the mysterious object. "Looks like a blue-in bath," he continued, "and the hanged if there ain't a whopping big bird in it. Rummiest birdcage I've ever set eyes on." The cause of the damage to the Myrtle's top hamper was the deck planks was the Z-64 observation basket. Instead of falling into the sea and decorously sinking to the bottom as von Sinsing had hoped, the contrivance had stuck the only vessel within a radius of 100 miles, with its head and neck driven completely through the aluminum side of the basket was the large eagle. The huge bird had struck the suspended basket such tremendous blow that the impact had wrenched away the metal clips securing it to the bottle screws. "Standing and looking at the blessed thing won't clear away this raffle," said the old man with asperity. "Set to all hands, secure and belay all you can, and cut the rest adrift." "Heave this lot overboard, Abe?" questioned his mate, kicking the basket with his sea foot. "Best let us stop a while," decided the skipper. "Pass a lashing round it. Be sharp with the topmast, or it will stove us in." Quickly the mate and a couple of hands cut away the rigging that held the topmost alongside. The heavy spar, which had been bumping heavily against the side, fell clear. The Myrtle, no longer impeded by the trailing wreckage, forged rapidly through the water, although she was now carrying foresail, staysail, and out jib only. By this time day had broken, the snow had ceased falling, and right ahead the pale sun shone in grey misty sky. The crew, having made all ship shape as far as lay in their power, were curiously regarding the cause of the catastrophe. They rather looked upon it as a diversion to break the monotony. "There's a log of short, sir," exclaimed one of the men, fumbling with the leather straps that secured the unused petrol bomb. The missile had been badly dented, but luckily the safety cap was intact. Had it not been so, the bomb would have ignited on impact, and the Myrtle, her snow-swept deck notwithstanding, would soon have been enveloped in flames from stem to stern. "Don't fool around with it, Ted," said another of the crew, who was an R&R man, had seen life and death in the Great War. "It's a bomb." "Well," observed Captain Prout, "that's more than I bargained for. I'll take my chances with floating mines, but it's coming too much of a good thing when these airmen blokes start chucking bombs haphazard like. Best pitch the old thing overboard, suggested the mate. No, objected the old man. If we do, we've no evidence. Someone's got to pay for this lash up. Government broad arrow on the thing too. That fixes it. When we make Hobart, I'll raise a chain or my name's not Abraham Prout. Chapter 18. Under Fire. It's going to be a close race, Canyon, remarked Forsyth as Z-64 crossed the Golden Hind's bow at a distance of less than a mile. Guess we're top dog, though, replied Kenneth. We've wiped out the Hun's useful lead, and at the halfway point, we're still practically level. Yes, agreed the baronet, but we must not ignore the element of chance. Let me see. He referred to the large Mercator map. According to the latest reports, Commodore Niels Eagle is at Cape Canaveral. His hop across the Atlantic and non-stop run over the Sahara takes a lot of beating. I'd like to meet that Yankee. And there's a Japanese Count Harashi. He's at Panama after having been hung up for 3 days at Honolulu. If he'd been able to carry on without a hitch, his quadruplane would have won the race. So it appears that all the competitors have completed half of the course at practically the same time. Aeroplane approaching, sir, reported Collins. Right ahead, a biplane was heading toward the Golden Hind, followed at close intervals by 3 more, seemingly ignoring the German airship, which was now on a diverging course. The 4 machines with admirable precision turned and accompanied the British airship. Took 2 up station on either side of the Golden Hind. Each flew with the New Zealand insignia. It was Forsyth's preliminary welcome to the anthropodes. Guiding serenely earthward in perfectly calm air, the Golden Hind entered the big shed prepared for her reception. The civil officers of Auckland turned out in force, supported by crowds of diggers and fair-sprinkled mayors. We quite understand, there was a mayor's remark when Forsyth thanked him for the warmness of his reception. Firmly but courteously refused to attend a banquet proposed to be given in his honor. This is a race, not a ceremonial tour. The prestige of the empire is at stake, so get on with it. Accordingly, the Golden Hind crew did get on with it. Aided by scores of the willing helpers, the replenished fuel tanks took in fresh water and provisions and necessary stores. A representative of the International Air Board was in attendance to sign the control sheet, certifying that the Golden Hind had completed half the circuit and had touched at a spot within a degree of the opposite point of the globe to his starting point. Within an hour and a quarter of her arrival at Auckland, the British airship started on her homeward voyage. Although New Zealand had no cause to show any goodwill toward the Huns, von Sinzing had no reason to complain of his reception. He was received coldly, it is true, but the New Zealanders, sportsmen all, were not ones to put obstacles in the way of an alien and former enemy. Notified by wireless of the Z-64 impending arrival at Napier, the authorities at that town had cylinders of hydrogen and large stocks of petrol in readiness for the German airship requirements. Within 10 minutes of the Golden Hind's departure from Auckland's, Z-64 started from Napier. The contest had now entered was upon more interesting phase. It was almost certain that the rivals would take a practically identical course, crossing the American continent in the neighborhood of the Isthmus and Panama, the lofty Andes extending like gigantic backbone from Colombia to Patagonia, an almost uninterrupted range of 450 miles in length presented a difficult, though not exactly unsurmountable obstacle to the rival airship. Vainly the wireless operation of the Golden Hind sought to pick up the Zeppelin. Von Sinzing had seen to that, for directly the German airship left New Zealand, he gave orders that on no account were messages to be transmitted, but on the other hand, the receivers were to be constantly in use. in order to pick up any radiograms that might throw light upon the movements of the Golden Hind. Apart from the chagrin at the knowledge that his attempt to burn the British airship was a failure, von Zinsing felt rather elated. His deceptive report of the course he had taken from Java to New Zealand had been accepted by the authorities without question. Hence, no suspicion could possibly be attached to him for the burning of the Fremantle aerodrome. He was also of the opinion that the Z-64 was a swifter craft than her rival, and possessed another advantage, that of greater fuel-carrying capacity. Even if the Golden Hind did possess a higher speed, she would have to align more frequently to replenish her tanks. As far as the Golden Hind was concerned, the run across the Panama was almost devoid of incident, with the exception of a distant view of a Pitcairn island famous in connection with the mutiny of the Bounty No Land was sighted until Galapagos Group was seen 10 miles from the starboard bow. The Golden Hind was now recrossing the equator. Fordyke, who had crossed the line at least a dozen times, and all sorts of vessels, from luxuriant liners to singing tramps, and even on one occasion on board a windjammer, declared that there was nothing to beat an airship for traveling in the tropics. For one thing, you can't keep cool, he added. Another that you will appeal to a good many people is that fact that an airship is beyond reach of Father Neptune and his meridians, and the doldrums, instead of being regarded as a terror, afford an easy passage to aircraft of all descriptions. With the setting of the sun, a thick mist arose, one of the humid tropical mists that are responsible for malaria and other zymotic diseases particular to the torrid zone. At a couple or 3,000 feet altitude, the Golden Hind was in pure clear air, but in the brief twilight, the banks of mist, as viewed from above, were picturesque in the extreme. But to the crew of the Golden Hind, the picturesque of the scene was in a measure unappreciated. They were nearing land, and a fog was one of the most undesirable climate conditions. Not only was it time for consideration, but the petrol supply was running low. But for this, Fordyke would have slowed down and cruised around until the mist dispersed with daybreak. We'll have to risk it and make a descent, he declared. Anywhere within easy distance of Panama will do, because it is a calm night, and there will be little or no risk of the Golden Hind being exposed to a high wind. Thank goodness were directionally wireless. At length, Fordyke felt convinced that the Golden Hind was nearing Panama. He had arranged by wireless to detonate 3 explosive rockets, and the United States Air Station was to reply with a similar signal, while searchlights directed vertically should enable the airship to locate the landing ground. Hanged if I can see any searchlights, exclaimed Bransdine. Killed by the mist, explained the baronet. I fancy I see a blur of light, 2 points on our port bow. What's that? Turned Scott. The wireless operator had left his cabin and was standing behind Fordyke, and the latter was peering through the darkness. There's a jam for some reason, announced Truscott. For the last 5 minutes I've been calling up Panama, but there's nothing doing. A high-powered installation using the same meter wave is cutting in. I asked them to knock off, but they haven't done so. Inconsiderate blighters, exclaimed Fordyke. Never mind, Truscott. We can get along all right now. I fancy I can see the aerodrome lights. Yes, sir, agreed Kenyon. 1 point on our port bow now. Then fire the rockets, ordered the baronet, at the same time telegraphing for the motors to be declutched. 3 vivid flashes rent the darkness, their brilliant illuminating a wide area of the fog bank. 1,000 feet below, while the report echoed over the level line of misty vapor like continuous peal of thunder. Within a minute of the discharge of the third rocket, 2 bursts of flames, accompanied by sharp reports, occurred at a distance of less than a quarter of a mile of the Golden Hind's port quarter. While after an interval of 15 seconds, 3 more exploded simultaneously in the same direction. "Guess Uncle Sam can't count," remarked Kenyon, imitating to perfection the nasal drawl of the typical New Englander. Looks to me like shrapnel," added Bransdine, "judging by the way that smoke mushroomed. It reminds me of the Archies over the Hind lines." "Good enough. We'll drop gently," decided Forsyth. "Stand with the holding down lines and have a couple of grapples ready." The amount of barium necessary to more than neutralize the lifting power of the gas and the dead weight of the airship was exhausted from the requisite number of ballots, and the Golden Hind began to sink almost vertically into the still air. Within 5 minutes she entered a belt of mist and warm, sticky-smelling atmosphere that reminded Kenyon of a hot house. "I hear voices," announced Peter. Not far beneath the airship, men were shouting and talking excitedly, but the crew of the Golden Hind were unable to understand what the men were saying. "Ahoy there," hailed Forsyth. "Stand by to take our ropes." Both grapples were carefully lowered, since there would be a grave risk entailed by throwing them overboard. At the same time, half a dozen holding down ropes were paid out from each side of the nacelle. These were caught by unseen hands, and the airship was quickly drawn earthwards at far too great a speed to please Sir Reginald Forsyth. "Gently," he shouted, having a vast heaving. The response was a terrible surprise. Simultaneously 2 searchlights were unmasked. Their powerful beams at short range punctuated the fog and impending upon the enormous envelope of the Golden Hind, while an irregular fuselage of a musketry assailed the airship on all sides. "Up with her," shouted Forsyth. "Charge all bayonets. We're stuck in a revolution." Chapter 19. Victims of a Revolution. Above the staccato of the rifle firing rose a roar of the Golden Hind's powerful motors. Volumes of barium released from their pressure flask rushed into the ballots. The airship rose at once in an oblique angle, her nose almost touching the ground. Then, as the aerial propellers went ahead, the forepart of the fuselage plunged over the rough ground, with 30 or 40 men hanging on like grim death to the guidelines, as many more trailing the grapple ropes. The Golden Hind, with the gas leaking from numerous bullet holes in her bayonets, was unable to seek refuge in her natural element. Fortunately for the safety of the airship's crew, the rifle firing quickly ceased as soon as the attackers realized that they had effected her capture. Apparently, it was their intention to prevent further damage being done to the huge airship. Finding that escape was impossible, unable to offer resistance, Forsyth opened out one of the doors to the nacelle and raised his hand above his head. It was no disgrace in surrendering thus. Alive, the crew of the Golden Hind could offer and receive explanations. Dead, they could not. The appearance of the captain of the Golden Hind was greeted by peremptory orders shouted in an unintelligible language. It certainly wasn't American. It seemed to Forsyth that it was some kind of Spanish, and since he was ignorant of that tongue, he failed to grasp the meaning of the volume of directions. Covered by scores of rifles, Forsyth, Kenyon, and Bransdine headed the crew of the airship, completely bewildered by the aggressive nature of their reception, and not knowing what fate would befall them. The position of the British airmen was critical in the extreme, yet they bore themselves calmly and bravely, scoring to let their captors know that inwardly at least they felt the breeze. Deftly as if they were all used to performing the operation, two men searched the baronet for concealed weapons. The rest of the crew subjected to the same treatment. Finding nothing in the nature of arms, the searchers looked rather astonished and disappointed. A gorgeous uniformed man, evidently the commander of the band, walked up to the baronet and saluted with an elaborate flourish. There was little doubt about it. He had already come to the conclusion that a mistake had occurred, and that he rather feared the consequence. "Americano, senor?" he asked. "No," replied Forsyth. "English." "Madre Dios!" ejaculated the commandant in ill-conceived consternation. He shouted something to his followers. After a brief interval, a tall, olive-figured follower, whose black oiled locks fell on his shoulders, slouched forward and announced, "Me speak English. Vowed you do here." Mutual explanations took a considerable time, but eventually Forsyth and his companions gleaned the salient facts for the reason of attack and capture of the Golden Hind. In the tropical mist, the airship had landed not in the Panama Zone, but in a neighboring republic, which, as it is by no means an unusual occurrence, was indulging in a little political diversion in the shape of a revolution. Just as present there were no means of ascertaining which was the predominant faction, but one side had gained possession of an old airship purchased at the disposal sale of one of the entry countries. The airship, hastily fitted out and provided with bombs and machine guns, was known to be on the point of operating against the Federals. The latter were therefore expecting the raiding airship when the Golden Hind, miles out of her course, owing to the mist and side winds that, unknown to the navigating officers, had blown her well to leeward, fired her detonation rockets almost immediately over Federal party's main force. The Federals knew nothing of the round-the-world race, but their anxiety to make amends was most marked. They offered to provide unlimited supplies of petrol and to render any assistance that lay in their power, but the fact remained that the hasty fuselage had caused considerable damage to the Golden Hind. At first, Forsyth thought that the airship was out of the running. Kenyon and Bransdine were of the same opinion, for the loss of beryllium through the punctured ballets seemed a fatal obstacle to the immediate resumption of the flight. Further examination revealed the fact that half the number of ballots were holed. Of almost every one could be patched and made gas-tight, since the rifle bullets, being of small caliber and of high velocity, had bore minute holes. But what was far more serious was the shortage of beryllium. Even by releasing the contents of the reserve cylinders, it was doubtful whether there was sufficient to lift the airship. "We'll have a good try anyway," declared Forsyth. Once we get her up, we'll rely on our planes to get us over the Atlantic. Thank goodness the motors are still intact. I wonder if there's much damage done to the navigation room. Several bullets came unpleasantly close to our heads, I remember. Examination resulted in the knowledge that although the aluminum sides of the nacelle had been liberally peppered, most of the nickel bullets had penetrated both sides without doing vital damage. What was the most serious injury was caused to the propeller of the nose 5 and 6 motors, the feather-edged blades being chipped by bullets. Since their spare blades had already been used earlier and the voyage replacement was out of the question, the ragged edges meant at least a reduction of 10 miles an hour. Even the blades did not fly to pieces when propellers were running at maximum speed. During the rest of the night, the crew worked with a will, patching, mending, and doping the hold fabric and carefully testing each repaired ballot with compressed air before refilling it with the precious beryllium. Meanwhile, the Federals brought quantities of petrol, employing teams of mules for the purpose of their petrol dump, being a good 5 miles from the scene of the Golden Hind's unfortunate landing. Every drop had to be passed through a fine gauze strainer before being allowed to enter the tanks, since foreign matters in the fuel might easily result in motor trouble. Anxious to make amends, the The commandants also presented the baronet with a quantity of excellent tobacco and cigars, several native cakes made of maize, and earthenware bowls filled with good butter, and a wicker crate of fresh fruit. By dawn, the refitting of the Golden Hind was accomplished, as far as lay in the power of the dauntless crew. Now came the crucial test. Would the airship rise under the lifting power of the reduced volume of barium? At 7 o'clock, the huge fabric showed signs of buoyancy. The quarter of an hour later, the recording instrument showed that only another 1,000 cubic feet of gas was necessary to overcome the force of gravity. "We haven't that quantity, sir," reported Chief Air Mechanic Hayward, "but I would suggest, sir, that if we release our reserve gas into the forward bayonets, that will lift her nose up clear of the ground, and the propellers will do the rest. Once we're up, sir, it will be as easy as shelling peas." "We can but try it," replied Forsyth. "At any rate, if we can make Panama, we'll manage with hydrogen for the remaining bayonets." "Righto, pass the word when you're ready." At 7:30, the crew were at their station. The forward portion of the airship was strained at the guiding ropes. The declutched motors, purring gently at a quarter throttle, were awaiting the orders that would transform them into propulsive forces until the plane could be brought into action. The Golden Hind was much in the nature of a rock soaring obliquely under the influence of a self-contained impulsive charge. Throwing open one of the windows of the riddled navigation room, Forsyth surveyed the crowd below. The Federal troops, in spite of their bizarre uniforms and varied equipment, were fairly well disciplined. Those not actually engaged in holding down the airship were formed up at about 50 yards from the nacelle, interested spectators of the large airship that had ever passed over the territory of the Central American Republic. "Let's go," shouted the baronet. The order interpreted by Seacroll, who claimed to have knowledge of English, was obeyed promptly. The men seemed to have an inkling of what would happen if they did not, and they dropped the guide ropes as though they were hot irons. Simultaneously, as the bow of the Golden Hind lifted, Kenyon telegraphed full ahead, with 4 of the propellers purring in their accustomed way, and the 2 after ones roaring like gigantic buzzers. As the jagged edge revolved rapidly in the air, the Golden Hind ascended obliquely, with her major axis inclined at an angle of 40 degrees to the horizontal. The Federal troops were waving their nondescript headgear and brandishing their rifles in token of farewell. Doubtless they were cheering and shouting also, but the noise of the airship propellers outvoiced all extraneous sound. At a height of 1,000 feet, the six planes were trimmed and brought into action. With the result, the Golden Hind settled down on almost an even keel. 4 minutes later, the scene of the unfortunate, regrettable incident was lost to sight. "Thanks be, we're up," ejaculated Forsyth. The next chapter is Chapter 10, Wireless Reports. I will be recording another ASMR episode of this visual audiobook, The Airship, The Golden Hind, tomorrow. It will probably start around 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And after this, in about 30 minutes, I'm going to come back to be live, and we'll continue our Half-Life 2 Let's Play. So I want to thank everyone for coming out. I'll see everyone tonight. Bye-bye.